Let's just be honest for a second. It really feels like we've forgotten how to talk to each other, right? Especially when we disagree. So today, we're going to dive into a really powerful guide that might just help fix that. It's from Walter Sinnott Armstrong's book, Think Again. Man, that quote, it just hits home, doesn't it? Because you see it everywhere. The biggest problems we're facing, climate change, the economy, they demand that we work together. But it seems like our public conversations are just designed to create more anger than actual progress, pushing any real solution further and further away. So how in the world did we get here? Well, the author argues that we're basically stuck in what he calls a cultural rut. It's not just that we disagree, it's that the way we disagree has gotten so much worse. And here's the heart of the diagnosis. We've stopped doing the one thing that's essential for a healthy debate, giving reasons for what we believe, and actually trying to understand the reasons for what other people believe. Instead, we just jump straight to assuming the other side must be either misinformed, maybe malicious, or, just plain crazy. And listen, this isn't just some vague feeling we all have. The book points to some pretty cold, hard data that proves it. Let's take a look at a few striking numbers from the Pew Research Center that show just how massive the gap between us has really become. Okay, so take a pretty standard political topic, stricter environmental laws. Seems straightforward enough, right? Well, just watch what happened to the gap between Republicans and Democrats on this one issue in only 2 decades. Back in 1994, the difference in agreement between the two parties was just 10 percentage points. Okay, a manageable gap. You can work with that. But then you fast forward 20 years, and by 2014, that gap had just exploded to 35%. It more than tripled. That's not just a small shift. That's like a canyon opening up between people. And this isn't some weird, isolated thing. We see the exact same pattern on economic issues. For example, let's look at the idea that government regulation of business does more harm than good. So, back in 1994, the gap on this was 18%. Significant, but not impossible to overcome. But 20 years later, it ballooned to 39%. It more than doubled. I mean, the takeaway here is pretty undeniable. This divide is real, it's something we can measure, and it's getting worse. So, what do we do? The book proposes this pretty radical shift in our thinking. And it all starts with one fundamental question. What is an argument actually for? What's the goal? Most of us, we think of arguing as a fight. It's you versus me, and the goal is to win. But Sinnott Armstrong says, what if we reframed it completely? What if we saw it as a learning opportunity? Then the goal isn't to beat the other person, it's to understand the problem better together. And in that model, who's the real winner? It's the person who changes their mind, because they're the one who actually learned something new and improved their own thinking. This is just a brilliant analogy from the book. You don't reason with a dog, right? You use force, you pull the leash. But when you talk to another person, giving them a reason is a fundamental sign of respect. It basically says, I see you as a rational person who can think through ideas with me. And asking for a reason, that shows the exact same respect. So this brings us to some incredibly useful practical tools. And these are not just, abstract concepts. They're simple, powerful techniques you can start using in your very next conversation to totally change how it goes. All right, the first tool is a game changer. And it all comes down to changing one little word. Instead of asking someone why they believe something, try asking them how their idea would actually work. Just think about it. When you ask somebody, why do you believe that? What happens? Immediately, the walls go up. People get defensive, they dig in their heels, they repeat their talking points, and the conversation is basically over before it even starts. But when you ask, how? Something really amazing happens. Asking, okay, so how would that policy work, step by step? It forces the other person, and honestly it forces you too, to actually grapple with the complexities and to realize the limits of your own knowledge. And this is actually backed up by research. Asking why just leads to people posturing, but asking how leads to reflection, it leads to moderation. It's a tiny change that replaces all that defensiveness with a little bit of intellectual humility for everybody involved. Okay, tool number 2 is what I like to call the ultimate listening test. Here's the challenge. Before you say a single word of criticism, you have to first summarize the other person's argument so clearly and so charitably that they actually say, wow, thanks. I wish I'd thought of putting it that way myself. This simple rule forces you to argue against what they actually believe, not some straw man version you've made up in your head. So, what's the big payoff for all this? Why bother arguing this way? Well, it's not just about having slightly nicer conversations. It's about rebuilding our ability to actually function as a society. Look, this isn't just about feeling better, it's about getting better results. When we argue to understand, it starts with humility. That humility naturally leads to respect, and from that respect, you get genuine mutual understanding. That is the only way we get to real compromise. And compromise is the only way we can even begin to tackle the massive shared problems that we're all facing. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. What might change in your own life, in your relationships, in your community, if the very next time you had an argument, your goal wasn't to win, but just to understand?